Welcome to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel. In this video I'm going to show you how to diagnose and replace a weak or failing compressor on an R-134a air conditioning system. And just a quick disclaimer here, I am by no means a professional. I've just been working on automotive AC systems long enough at this point that I have a pretty good idea what I'm doing. So the first step in diagnostics is just going to be what I got going on here. It's about 88 degrees outside right now. Pretty decent day, but you can see I've got my AC cranked as high as it'll go, and you know it's cool, but just not quite where I want it. It's mostly comfortable, but you know, if I come to a stop and sit for more than a couple minutes, it's not good. And before anybody jumps to conclusions and says that, oh well, I just need to recharge the system, I already have. And I actually got some pretty interesting pressure readings, which I'll show you here in a few. The truck's got over 500,000 miles on it, and the compressor looks like it's the original. So I got a feeling that it's just getting worn internally. And another interesting thing that I've noticed too is that when the air temperature drops a bit, once it gets down to about, I don't know, 75-ish degrees, it actually starts working quite well. And that leads me even more to believe that it is a failing compressor, because it's not able to maintain the higher pressures needed when the temperature goes up, but as the temperature goes down, the pressures drop in the system, and it's able to keep up with that. And since the system has to be evacuated in order to get the compressor swapped out, I'm basically going to be rebuilding the entire air conditioning system while I'm in there. I'm going to be replacing the accumulator, the orifice tube, and also some O-rings on the Schrader valves, because I know for a fact that at least my high side, the Schrader valve is leaking at one of the O-rings. And one more quick note before we get started. All of the concepts in this video will apply to any R-134a system, regardless of make, model, that I'm aware of. There might be a few oddball systems out there that I'm not aware of, but for the most part, everything will be the same as far as the concepts go. Now, the individual parts, placement of parts, all of that stuff is obviously going to be different. I'm doing this on a 2001 F350 with a 7.3 power stroke. So your compressor might be in a different location. I'm certain all the parts are going to look different if you're doing it on a different vehicle, but you should still be able to learn something from this video because the concepts are all the same. If you don't have a set of gauges, you cannot accurately diagnose this problem. You must have a set of gauges. You don't have to buy any though. You can rent them from AutoZone or Riley. Any of your local auto parts stores will usually rent these out to you. They're kind of expensive to rent, but as long as you take them back undamaged, you get all of your money back, so it's basically free. So to hook your gauges up, you're gonna need to find your high and low side ports. For now, you can just ignore the yellow hose. I just have that on there for charging. I just never took it off. What you're looking for is these things here. And on this truck, this is your high side, and your low side is back here on the accumulator. So we'll just pull the caps off. And if you're doing this while the engine's running, definitely watch your fingies. You don't want to look like my buddy.
I used to laugh at safety. Now they call me Three-Finger Joe.
So next we'll make sure these are closed off completely. Very important step. Make sure these are backed off all the way. And then it just goes together like a normal air fitting does. You just pull back on the collar, snap it down, then do the same on the high side. Blue is, oh, that about caught the belt. Blue is always going to be your low side. Red is always going to be your high side. Now mine were already assembled because I was using them. When you rent these, you might have to do a little bit of assembly, just screwing the fittings together. If you can't figure that part out, the rest of this is probably way too complicated for you. So once you've got them hooked up, again, make sure these are closed. It's double checking. And then we'll just thread these down. as you're threading them down, gauges will move. And I should make a note right now that before you even start doing this, make sure that all of your other components are good, especially like your fan clutch, because if your fan clutch is weak and your fan's not spinning, you know, it won't make much of a difference going down the road, but sitting at idle, you're really gonna have crappy AC because it's not pulling much, if any, air through the condenser up front. So check stuff like that first before you really start getting this deep into it. But I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you possibly already knew that. But, you know, if not, check that first. And if that checks out, then we can start looking at what we're doing right now. So right now, this is where it gets a little bit more advanced, complicated, whatever you want to say. There's a chart you need to follow for what the pressure should be based on the ambient temperature. So right now it is 88 degrees, which means that the low side should be between 45 and 55 psi. And as you can see, we are. Now at 85 degrees, the chart isn't perfect. At 85 degrees, the high side should be 225 to 250, and at 90 degrees, it should be 250 to 275. So we kind of split the difference there, call it, you know, 250 is what we should be at right now with the 88 degrees. And as you can see, we're not really anywhere near that. So that tells me that the compressor is getting worn inside and it just can't build enough pressure to have the system work properly. The low side is perfectly fine at 55, which is interesting because when I recharged it a few weeks ago, my low side was actually high, but the high side never really changed. So looking at this again, it's still just confirming to me that yes, the compressor is getting weak. Now if your low side is high and your high side is low, that could potentially also be an orifice tube issue, but considering that, you know, low side looks perfectly fine right now, I'm going to say that we're looking at a weak compressor, failing compressor. Oh, another thing to check too is your compressor clutch. There's actually a clearance that you're supposed to have in here, and I actually did this years ago. It wasn't working, so I actually took the clutch off, removed the shim, and put a different shim in to get the right clearance, right tolerance between there, and that seemed to work for quite a while. But you can see my clutch is not slipping. If your clutch is slipping, it's going to look like a bad compressor as well. So now that we've got that far with the diagnostics, I've determined that yes, it is in fact the compressor is weak. So I'm going to replace it, and I'm going to be showing you all how to do that, along with, like I said, a whole bunch of other components. So there's a sequence I like to do when I take the gauges off that will keep as much refrigerant in the system as possible and let as little as possible vent out to the atmosphere. So what I'm going to do is first go ahead and just back this off. We're good there. Go ahead and take that off. And now what I'm going to do is shut the engine off and let the high and low sides equalize. Because if we take the gauge off the high side right now, it's still going to be at over 200 psi, so there's a lot more volume of refrigerant in there. Then we'll take this off. And you can see right now the high side's coming down. The reason I do that is because once you shut the system off, the low side will actually raise up as the high side goes down, and they'll equalize somewhere between, you know, 80 and 110 psi depending on ambient temperature. That's close enough for me. So again, now be mindful with this one. This one might be a little hot. Don't forget to screw these back on for now so you don't lose them.